I'm joined now by Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism. Mark, I've got you on here to talk about migration, but it would be remiss if I didn't ask you about all the Mandelson stuff. This is so astonishing to me that it is like a John le Carré novel. It was very clear to anybody with half a political brain or even just a brain cell that Mandelson is like the last person on earth you would pick to be US ambassador, and yet they did. Why? What on earth is the US supposed to make of this? And also, are we to ask serious questions of the Prime Minister willy-nilly just ignoring the advice of the intelligence agencies?
Yeah, both great questions, Alex. I mean, I don't think anyone's really surprised it's ended this way, right? Obviously, we, the public, didn't know the full extent of his relationship with Epstein. And if you read the emails and the handwritten notes, I mean, they make your skin crawl, don't they? What's particularly odd here, and why I think this will run and run, despite Mandelson being removed as the US, as our ambassador to the US, is that at PMQs on Wednesday, Keir Starmer was sort of adamant in his very legalistic way that all due process had been followed. We have followed the process to the last jot, dot and comma. Every I was dotted and every T was crossed. He never much seems to care about what the outcomes are, as long as the process was followed. But it's now emerging, isn't it, that quite a lot of warnings were flagged up, unsurprisingly, about Peter Mandelson, and those were overridden by the Prime Minister and perhaps by the behest of Morgan McSweeney. Yeah. Well, that then makes this a colossal error of political judgment, not a matter of process. And to underscore how weak the Prime Minister's position is, we've got the odd position now where for two Prime Minister's questions on Wednesdays in a row, Kemi Badenoch stood up and asked, have you got full confidence in such a person? Week one was Angela Rayner. Week two was Peter Mandelson. He says, oh, absolutely, yes, full confidence. And a day or two later, they are gone. I'm intrigued to know who Kemi Badenoch picks on next Wednesday, because presumably that person will be out of a job on the Thursday or Friday afterwards.
Well, this is it. When you look at the rap sheet, I mean, Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, September the 5th, 2025, had to resign as Housing Secretary, amongst other things, because she didn't pay stamp duty. Andrew Gwynn, Minister of State for Health, July 25, sacked and suspended after sending WhatsApp messages containing racist and sexist comments about colleagues. Louise Kay, Secretary of State for Transport, resigned after pleading guilty to a fraud offence, August 2025. Rushanara Ali, Minister of State for Homelessness, resigned after making people homeless, July 2025. Tulip Siddiq, Minister of State for Anti-Corruption, resigned due to accusations of corruption, June 2025. This is astonishing. The rap sheet, I've never seen the crumbling. I mean, these aren't just characters in the back benches. These are Minister of State, Secretary of State, Minister of State, Deputy Prime Minister. Now it seems to me Morgan McSweeney's probably going to have to go. Who's his right-hand man?
Yeah, and I think what makes it even worse than just, as you say, running through that rap sheet, Alex, is Starmer couldn't have been clearer going into the last general election that it was all going to be very different under Labour. Those awful, untrustworthy, sleazy Tories were going to be gone, and it was going to be like a breath of fresh air. He was going to return government to the public service. So the fact that you've got this litany of independent disasters, I mean, reflects on them appallingly. There hasn't been an improvement in ethics in public life, if you look through that list of people who've already gone. And we're only, just over a year into this government. This is supposed to still be their honeymoon period, right? It's supposed to get worse from here. When you get to the midterm of a parliament, that's when things are supposed to be pretty tricky. But just a year in with a massive majority, and we're seeing this government crumble already, really. I mean, authority is absolutely crumbling away from through the hands of Keir Starmer. What a mess. And this was supposed to be the great reset for him, right? It was just 10 days ago.
Phase two.
Phase two. Are we now on to phase three, phase four?
I think we're on to phase out, Mark. I think it's the final phases. Let's hope it is. I mean, I think I'm really fascinated to see what happens during this state visit. This, of course, was going to be the jewel in the crown of the special relationship, the big invite, the pomp and ceremony, the buttering up Donald Trump. Please, no one tell him what David Lammy once said about him. And then you've got, I mean, it sounds a dreadful thing to say, but the timing of the tragic events in America, I think is, going to overshadow what should otherwise be very deep-held concerns by the United States, that the Prime Minister is putting somebody so dangerous into such an important position. Let's move on to another news story, because we've been on Mandelson a lot. Here we go. Something that the government are just... someone said to me the other day, is it that they can't do anything about the small boats, or they don't want to? And I'm of the position that they just don't want to, because I'm pretty sure they could when I look at how other European countries who are signatories of the ECHR go about handling a similar crisis. But it's emerged last night that the Home Office's latest desperate plan is to put illegal immigrants into student accommodation. They've tried to slip in a planning application to transform a 247-bed block of flats in Leeds into a hostel for asylum seekers. I mean, who next? Certainly where my parents live, they've turned sheltered accommodation for young adults into houses for asylum seekers. Oh, I know. Let's chuck out people who are waiting for a house, who are vulnerable, who are British citizens. Let's give those houses to these people coming in. Oh, what about veterans and army accommodation? Let's give that to them. Oh, what about sheltered accommodation? They can have that as well. I know. How about students? You've got to move out now, because we're going to put so-called asylum seekers in there. It's crazy. Oh, am I going to be turfed out of my house tomorrow for asylum seekers?
Well, who knows, Alex? Who that knows? I mean, it is crazy. And the odd thing about how they're tackling this is it seems that they've got into their head that the only thing that people care about is whether these asylum seekers are in specifically hotels. Well, I don't think that is all that people care about. The question is whether the accommodation is being used for too long and is too luxurious, and the sort of stuff that British people can't potentially access themselves. That's the concern. I mean, I suppose it adds a little bit on top if it is indeed a nice hotel, but I don't think people are going to say, well, that's great, everybody's out of hotels, but they're now in very nice previous student accommodation in Headingley in Leeds. People are furious that highly expensive accommodation is being provided, that the entire system is broken. Look, if we actually had a system where we could process asylum claims, I'm being too optimistic here, but in a day or two, or in a week or two, you could possibly see the case of putting somebody in a cheap hotel 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, but Poland's turned around and said they're just going to suspend asylum claims. Like, we can't take any more, no thanks. No more asylum seekers here, please. Germany's turned around and said if you're being deported, you no longer get a right to a lawyer. In Spain, you turn up on a Spanish beach. You're lucky if you're given a mat on the floor of an aircraft hangar before 2 weeks later you're sent home. Greece is actually turning boats around. In Britain, it's like, oh, I know, instead of hotels, let's just put them right into the heart of the community and just give them accommodation by any means possible, as long as it isn't any sort of deportation centre. Because heaven forfend, if you happen to have been in the Manston deportation centre, you can now sue the UK for millions of pounds.
Yeah, it's all crazy. And I think you're right to point out those comparisons, Alex. I mean, I think we have to leave the ECHR. You're right, though, that even if we remain in it for the time being, we could take a much, much tougher line. The whole problem is that the entire system, our entire legal system, is overly geared to the interests of the asylum seeker and not geared to the interests of the indigenous population and the taxpayer. Now, I'm willing to give asylum seekers a fair hearing. If you really have turned up and you really can establish that you are fleeing certain death or torture or persecution, we should give you a fair hearing. But we've allowed the system to make it far, far too easy for people to pull the wool over our eyes, for the onus to be on us to disprove their claim, rather than the firm onus being on them to prove their claim. Far too easy to lose your paperwork, and then we just have to take what you're saying on trust. So a much, much tougher approach needs to be enforced here. And here's something to conjure with about the housing, right? We could sort this out quickly. That's why I agree with you, Alex. This is basically a lack of political will. The total number of asylum seekers in hotel accommodation in the UK is about the equivalent to the number of people who visit the Glastonbury Festival on any given day. So we would just need to construct something on the rough scale of the Glastonbury Festival site.
How about just using Worthy Farm?
Exactly.
I bet old What's-his-chops loves a bit of a...
Not quite so they say. So I don't know whether you actually requisition Glastonbury or just look for somewhere similar. But it doesn't strike me that that should be beyond the wit of man to construct something like that.
Has it not, since time immemorial, been the international protocol and prototype that there are refugee camps? There are refugee camps, right, in the middle of Syria, and the winters in Syria get pretty darn nippy and the summers pretty darn hot. You know, this is what is used in Kenya, in Ghana, in you name it, there are tents. In the UK, the worst thing that's going to face them, despite now having an emergency siren about, you know, some weather warnings, which is just a load of bunk and what there's drizzle in the playground, get the kids in. You know, in the UK, the worst thing, the most harsh conditions that people are going to have to face if they are actually put in encampments is a spot of rain.
Yeah, I agree. And it's achievable if you've got the political will. I mean, although it turned out to be farcical and useless, let's just look at what happened at the start of the COVID outbreak. We were able to build a Nightingale hospital in London in about 7 days.
Yeah.
It was. And that's quite a sophisticated thing, building a hospital. I would have thought architecturally, building some sort of encampment is an awful lot simpler than building a hospital with all the necessary medical kit.
I tell
But
you
the political
what,
will's there, you can do it.
I tell you what, Mark, the other day I happened to go to one of those storage places, right? I mean, I've never been to one before. It's amazing. It's like this subterranean labyrinth of all of these air-conditioned rooms. There's electricity, you go down floor, you know, 5 floors underground. There's lighting, air conditioning, there's a bathroom on each floor. And I was like, you could use one of those. Very quickly, before we go to break, you know, a lot of people say that the reason stuff doesn't get done in Britain and the common sense policies that we're discussing never get employed is because of the blob. And Richard Tice, Reform's deputy party leader, has essentially said they want to scrap a neutral civil service. They want to hire anti-ECHR staff. They'd create a new department for immigration staffed solely by people who agree with the party's radical policies, to leave the ECHR and implement mass deportations, and has also floated the idea of US-style political appointments for judges. I mean, it does seem to me that they could be onto something in terms of needing to tackle all of these unelected apparatchiks in Whitehall who are all seem to be signed up to the radical left-wing agenda.
Back on right, Richard Tice is pretty much on the money on this one. We have deluded ourselves that our civil service and bureaucracy is somehow completely neutral, completely objective, not biased to one side or the other. And in fact, they are basically all of the same mindset. I think Richard Tice is completely right that if you want to turn this country round, at least civil servants who are involved in policy, that's probably say the top 3,000 or so, they'd have the titles director or director general or permanent secretary. Those should be political appointments. I mean, Tommy in accounts or you know, Jill who does the filing, that's fine. It doesn't really matter what their politics are. But if you're actually involved in policy making, I think we've got to be honest that you're going to approach that through a political lens, and the government of the day should be able to decide who they want those key officials to be, rather than the key officials typically being able to outmaneuver the government we voted for. He is definitely onto something that could transform the way that Britain is governed.
Interesting stuff, Mark. Thank you ever so much. Always brilliant catching up with the excellent Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism.